lawyers have is they're already using the law. Because if they're holding dual Pakistani-U.S. nationals in Bagram or somewhere else, and that injunction was allowed to stand, they would be in contempt of court. So the appellate court, after they did our hearing, didn't rule until Clapper. And then they used Clapper to say, Hedges doesn't have standing in Clapper, therefore he doesn't have standing in the lawsuit against the NDAA. And that allowed the court to essentially avoid having to rule on the issue, because the stripping of due process and the use of the military to carry out extraordinary rendition of American citizens cannot be defended constitutionally. It is an egregious, stark violation of our constitutional right to due process and to the prohibition of the military as a policing force on American streets. Why? Why do we have wholesale surveillance? Why do we have the NDAA? Why has the Obama administration used the Espionage Act 8 times to shut down whistleblowers? People like Thomas Drake, Snowden, of course, has been hit with this. And the combination of the Espionage Act coupled with wholesale surveillance, and we are the most photographed, monitored, eavesdropped, recorded population in human history. So, and I covered the Stasi state in East Germany. Why is it all coming together? And I think it's because in all of the scenarios that they run, they understand that the galloping effects of climate change, coupled with a prolonged economic stagnation, and maybe we're not in a depression, but we're certainly in a stagnant economy. I mean, real wages have either remained stagnant or declined since the early 1970s, means there will be some kind of blowback. They know something's coming. And they are preparing both the legal and physical mechanisms for a response. It's why all these police departments are getting Kevlar jackets and long-barreled weapons and APCs. And I mean, if you do, a SWAT team does a drug bust in Oakland in the middle of the night, kicks down their doors, everybody's dressed in black, they've got M16s, there's command APC outside, there may even be a helicopter. No difference between that and a night raid in Fallujah. And that's what always happens that within empire, that the techniques for control on the outer reaches of empire migrate back into the heart of empire. And empires always collapse internally. They hollow themselves out from the inside, which is what we're doing to our universities, to our infrastructure, in the name of austerity. And at this point, the mechanism, the liberal establishment, the institutions that, as Karl Popper wrote, makes piecemeal or incremental reform possible. That capacity that Roosevelt had to adjust the system to save capitalism is gone. And as Karl Marx rightly said, unregulated, unfettered capitalism is a revolutionary force. Because without self-imposed limits, it commodifies everything. Human beings become commodities, the natural world becomes a commodity that it then exploits until exhaustion or collapse. And that's why the environmental crisis is intimately twinned with the economic crisis. 40% of the summer Arctic sea ice melts, and Shell Oil looks at it as a business opportunity, dropping $500 million, the death throes of the planet. In theological terms, these corporate forces are forces of death. And they will sacrifice the next generation and succeeding generations for short-term profit. And there is now no capacity we have through the formal systems of power to ameliorate or to protect ourselves from a rapacious corporate capitalism, a global neo-feudalism, which is supranational. It has no, they're not like the Mellons or the Rockefellers or the Carnegies, or they don't have any loyalty to the nation state. I mean, these people, at least physically, were men. You may have been shooting everybody in Ludlow and Homestead, but they were physically within the nation. Now it's gone. It's dissipated. You have most of what's produced in Dickinsonian sweatshops in Bangladesh or southern China. And we have, in many ways, gone back to the horrific conditions of labor that we saw in the 19th century. There's a very fine book by, I think, our greatest living political philosopher, Sheldon Wolin, called Democracy Incorporated, which I urge you to read. And Wolin, in the book, describes the system that has been created as inverted totalitarianism. By that he means it's not classical totalitarianism. It doesn't find its expression through a demagogue or a charismatic leader, but through the anonymity of corporations. That in a classical totalitarian regime, you have a reactionary or revolutionary force that will overthrow a structure and replace it. In inverted totalitarianism, you have corporate forces that purport to pay fealty to electoral politics, the iconography and language of American patriotism, the Constitution, and yet internally have seized all of the levers of power as to render the citizen impotent. And it doesn't matter at that point what the citizens want. The citizens made it very clear to Obama what they wanted. And Obama, who, unlike his predecessor, is intelligent, understood. I sort of blame Obama more because I think Bush was just kind of clueless. Actually, I went to prep school with so many Bushes, I can assure you he was clueless. But Obama isn't clueless. And there, in some ways, there's something deeply cynical about Obama because he knows where the centers of power lie, and he serves those centers of power at our expense. I participated, as you know, in the Occupy movement, and I think the reason the Occupy movement frightened the power elite so much is because it was a majoritarian movement, that they all thought they were radicals. But in fact, on all of the issues, and we know from the polling, on all of the issues that they expressed, the majority of American citizens were with them. Whether it was rational health care, whether it was jobs, whether it was green energy, and in Zuccotti, on the weekends, you would see families come in from the suburbs, from New Jersey or Hoboken or somewhere, and they'd be pushing the strollers, with their kids up and down the park. And I think that terrified the power elite, which is why, under the direction of Barack Obama, there was a coordinated federal effort to eradicate those encampments. Now, the eradication of those encampments, politically, I think, were dangerous. These were nonviolent movements that expressed a legitimate grievance, and it was primarily driven by what Bakunin would call day class intellectuals, the sons and daughters, white, of the middle class, who were beginning to suffer what people of color in marginal communities have been suffering for decades, and in terms of not being able to find meaningful employment, sustainable employment, police abuse, all of that was new to these kids. But that's a very volatile moment, as Bakunin points out, in a society, when you have that fusion. And this was a dispute between Bakunin and Marx. Bakunin was right, that no revolution is actually propagated by the poor. It's actually driven by those day class intellectuals, those people who have been risen and trained and educated for a position within the elite of society, relatively the elite in society, but find there's no place for them. And At that point, you have revolutionary tinder. Paul Krugman writes frequently about a rational response to the economic crisis. And he's right, we should have a rational response. But if you look at Occupy, if you're trying to keep the equilibrium of your society, what would have been a rational response? A rational response would have been a moratorium on foreclosures and bank repossessions, a forgiveness of all student debt, a massive jobs program, especially targeted at people under the age of 25, and a rational healthcare system, the public option, universal healthcare for all, as a right. In moral terms, we live in a country where it is legally permissible for corporations, pharmaceutical and insurance corporations, to hold sick children hostage while their parents bankrupt themselves trying to save their sons or daughters. Capitalists should never be allowed anywhere near a healthcare system. And the game that was played, Obamacare is Romney Care. It was written in the Heritage Foundation, was adopted in 2006 by Romney, and then it was, with Liz Fowler, who's working for Baucus, who's now making millions, going back, having done her job for the insurance companies. It was written by Fowler. The difference between Obamacare and Romney Care is that written into Obamacare was $447 billion in subsidies for the pharmaceutical and insurance industry, the equivalent of a bank bailout bill for the pharmaceutical and insurance industry. And that was the game. That is the classic game that was played, as if there was any real substantial difference. When I was in Zuccotti, Cornel West and I held people's hearing at Goldman Sachs.